So here's the state of my characters after week 2 and 3. I actually had very limited time to play in week 3 and only managed to fill my vaults, so all of the progress in this episode is going to be from week 4 of the challenge. But don't you worry, I went hard in week 4. My DK was done, leaving me more time to focus on less characters, but those characters are going to be way harder to do as I've not tanked before this since TBC and healed the total of like 10 Mythic plus dungeons in Dragonflight. So the Demon Hunter was in a pretty good place. Before this week I was already pretty comfortable in 12s, so I warmed up in an 11 and jumped straight into a 12 workshop. My approach to pugging as a tank in these key levels is to minimize risk when I can help it, so pulling this trash in 2 pulls and lust the boss. I've seen way too many detonates go off in my life. We had a bit of a derp on the first boss, but otherwise not tragic. By the third boss we were doing kind of okay, but unfortunately 2 people became mechanical garden fertilizer on this fight, which delayed us on an already dire looking timer. Now, this was my bad. Skips should only really be used in pugs if there is no way you can make the timer otherwise, and somehow I felt like we were so behind with all the deaths that I didn't actually analyze the timer and decided to call a skip, which failed and failed as the timer. But we never give up and I was right back in a workshop 12. I think 1 death from the first trash is mandatory in this dungeon, to be honest. But the group played on point and we timed the dungeon with only 2 deaths for 44 whole rating. I got a Cinderbrew 13 and wanted to get this out of the way, but on 12. I think this is the hardest dungeon for pugs, so I saw this as a challenge and put together a good group. We had a ton of deaths by the third boss, but it looked easily timeable, as after that boss we only had 1 trash pack and the last boss. But the Titans had other plans. This disconnect was absolutely tragic, as that was going to be one of the hardest keys I'd have to do on my path to 3k out of the way, and now I had to get the key again and time it again. I felt like I needed a mental break after that, so I jumped on my monk to pug heroic raid with my friend, and actually won some heroic tier shoulders, replacing one of my champion pieces, which is amazing as I need every bit of gear to help me hit my goal on the monk. Then I decided to stay on my monk and quickly ran a Dark Flame 10 as warm up and to see if I still had the healing shops on the likes of Candle King. After timing the Dark Flame, I decided to get the last 10 I haven't yet timed, which was Theater, and in a mostly uneventful run, we timed it with relative ease. Emboldened a bit, I decided to jump into Floodgate 10, which I think is the hardest dungeon to heal overall. Between the healing on the first boss, those Blood Warper adds, the dispels on the second boss, the horrendous third boss, and no less awful last boss with those dots, and getting trolled with electrified pools going straight into a heavy group damage phase. Speaking of, I got trolled hard by someone else's spark here, and we ended up wiping, but we were so far ahead on the timer that we just went again and timed it. Somewhat emboldened by my relatively low levels of fumbling with the healing, I decided to jump into a 12 workshop. And remember what I said about risky pulls and pugs? Yeah. It was my key, so I went straight into the 11. At this point 11s were worth raiding, as I've not done a single 11 on the monk by this point. The key went pretty smooth up until the last boss, where people derped with the orbs and I ended up dying to them because there was some weird bug where they weren't being dragged back, but we had all the combat reses in the world and we ended up 2-chesting it. Well, that was an easy 11, let's go for this Dark Flame 12. Dark Flame is easy, right? No, not the first area. Back into it on 11 though, and went pretty smooth. I was interested to see how I do on the Candle King. I ended up not fumbling too hard, and the run was overall an easy 2-chest. My friend had a Priory 11, so that was our next stop. Super smooth run overall, and we 2-chested it with almost 0 deaths, except I somehow got blinded and then blasted, but hey, I'm not counting that one against me. Next up on my quest to get all 11s done was Theater, and my goodness, this first boss is stressful on a healer, especially if you're a melee healer. The run actually went alright until we got to the platforms before the third boss, where the tank needed to pull extras because we skipped a mini boss. Unfortunately, he decided to pull more extras than we needed when I was absolutely not ready for a pull and was actually going for the portal, which led to him dying and our timer being ripped. Then I came along to my friend's 12 Motherlode. I was a bit stressed about healing 12s since I've had mixed results in 11s so far, but I had to do not only 12s but 13s at the end of the day for my challenge, so no use hiding. Well, what can I say, there is a huge difference between healing groups that avoid damage and use defensives and ones that don't. It would have been a super clean run if I had watched my feed here, but my death resulted in more deaths. I was waiting for a combat res, but paladins don't buy that shit, I swear. We had this little hiccup where it seemed like the tank thought he could stand up to the bomb's bullying as long as he stood tall and proud, but for some reason it didn't work. I'm not really sure why. Anyway, double War Machine with Lustig was no problem, and the last boss turned out to be no problem as well. First 12 done on the monk, hell yeah, talk about a confidence boost. Then I was ready to jump into more 11s to work towards having all keys down on 11, and it was time for a redemption theater run after the last 11 failure. I accepted a group of 3 players, 2 of them being well rated and geared, and they were carrying a 640 something hunter, and I really played on point this dungeon. I even tried my best to keep the hunter up, but it was not always possible. I actually died myself right here. Can someone tell me how the F that hit me? Okay, well, I can't save the hunter from getting smashed like that. Okay, so the hunter ended up being dead on every single boss, but that's okay. We were still very good on time, but the last boss, and nothing can really go wrong on the last boss, right? No, there's really no way. I mean, come on.
An ally has been slain. Enemy double kill. Enemy triple kill. Enemy quadra kill. Enemy pentakill. Shut down.
Next up was my most hated dungeon of the season in terms of healing, Floodgate, 11. But I thought, hey, I gotta heal these dungeons on 12 or 13 eventually, better throw myself in the deep end. First boss survived? Check. Blood Warpers survived? Check. Third boss barely survived? Kinda check. Fourth boss? Yeah, totally survived, 0 derps, you saw nothing. Anyway, another 11 under my belt on the Monk, it was time for a change of scenery, and I jumped into a Cinderbrew 11 with my friend on the DH. Having previously almost timed this 12, if not for a disconnect, surely an 11 is not going to pose any problem, right? Okay, so surely that was the only problem it would pose, right? Yeah, actually that was the only one. Next up, I wanted to do my Theater 12, and I invited this nice looking priest and his mage friend, only to get the beefiest mage sign up I've ever seen only seconds later. But I couldn't bring myself to kick the priest mage combo, and we couldn't take another mage as we wouldn't have had a combat res. Anyway, the Theater 12 went really smooth up until the last boss as usual, where we had 2 more deaths, but we timed it anyway, thankfully. 3k was in my sights now, so no time to waste, straight into a 13 Motherlode. So this run was a bit doomed from the start, but the real doom happened on this pull. We died despite having a shaman healer, there's no way. Anyway, straight into another 13 Dark Flame Cleft. And despite having 6 deaths before the Candle King, we were still on track because Dark Flame has a really lenient timer, but with this skip derp, we ended up doing the mini boss when we didn't need to, which took another huge toll on our timer. It's almost like I should have learned from the workshops earlier that skips and pugs don't mix. Anyway, we were super tight on time, so I jumped straight into the last boss with all of the trash we picked up on the way, and we ended up wiping, but to be honest, even if we hadn't, we would not have timed it. I still really wanted to push as close to 3k as possible, and my friend had a 14 Motherlode on his mage, so we said YOLO and tried it. We ended up ass pulling mobs we didn't want to, then of course we had deaths on this cursed pull, then a couple more deaths to bombs, and we ended up just not having the time for the last boss. We finished the key being 1 minute and 4 seconds over in the first 14 I've ever tried on my tank, which was tragic on a scale similar to the Cinderbrew disconnect. But it's okay. We were about to make up for this long, drawn-out failure with a really fast failure in a Theater 13. But what I really needed was not a theater. It was to take revenge on Motherlode, so I got a good bunch together and jumped in. This went smoothly until I decided to pull a War Machine into the third boss after my previous PTSD of not making the timer. This group was so good, but we were 4 melees with a Pres Evoker healer, and this was not the best idea, and we ended up racking up 3 deaths on this boss alone. Thankfully, the group was really good until the very last boss for some reason, where we racked up 3 more deaths, but we timed it anyway. First 13 on the DH, done. Hell yeah. My last try to improve my score for the week was the Cinderbrew 12. It started out pretty well, but we racked up 9 deaths before the third boss. We still got to the last boss with time to kill it, but I was tilted, so tanked it like an animal, and people kept catching lava waves like they were upgrades, and we had 4 deaths on this fight alone. This was a pretty sad turn of events, yet another tragic Cinderbrew which should have been timed, but overall I felt like I made some great progress this week. I timed my first 13 on the DH, proving to myself that I can actually hit 3k, and I healed my first 12 on the Monk, also getting some much needed confidence on what feels like my weakest role. So who thinks I can hit 3k on my Demon Hunter next week? How long will it take on my Monk? Predictions in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to not miss the next episode, it is going to be spicy. See you there.